कार्यक्रम है इसको आरंभ करने जा रहे हैं। सर्वप्रथम मैं यहाँ पर स्वागत के लिए तवांग के उपायुक्त महोदय को आमंत्रित करता हूँ।
Honorable Sikyong Penpa Tsering, distinguished officers and officials from Central Tibetan Administration, Arunachal, Arunachal Pradesh, my friend settlement officer from Tanzania, Honorable Chairman DOCA, Department of Karmic and Adhyatmic, Sri Jambe Wangdila, Secretary General Mon Nimang Sokpa, Sri Namge Tsering, distinguished local officers, ladies and gentlemen. At the very outset, I, on behalf of myself, on behalf of district administration, and on behalf of the people of Arunachal Pradesh, particularly Tawang, would like to extend a very warm welcome to Sri Penpa Tsering, Honorable Sikyong to Mount Tawang. I also extend a warm welcome to all the officers and officials of Central Tibetan Administration, Dharamsala, Himachal Pradesh, and our distinguished colleagues, Settlement Officer, Tanzania, West Kameng District. I extend warm welcome to Sri Jambe Wangdila, Chairman DOCA, Secretary General, MMT Sri Namge Tsering, Senior Leader, Sri Sharabla, my friend Sri Thuptan Kaldan, Engineer Thuptan Kaldan. He is Superintendent Engineer. He is posted in Delhi, Arunachal Bhavan. And all the distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Taking advantage of this platform, I take an opportunity to acknowledge my deep sense of gratitude to Honorable Sikyong and all his entourage for taking out their precious time for the people of both the communities, locals and Tibetans residing in different parts of Arunachal Pradesh. Sir, this visit will help us to bring the communities more closer to each other, and it will strengthen the already very strong cemented relations between the two communities. We, the people of Mondial, are truly grateful to the CTA for imparting both the religious and modern education through various monasteries and TCVs and Tibetan Central Schools, and also Yeoman Service of Mansikang located in different parts of India. We are also grateful to CTA for imparting training course for our young budding artists through TIPA, Dharamshala, and now we have MIPA here in Tawang, which is the precious product of TIPA, with the blessings of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And thank you so much, sir. Lastly, we pray Lord Buddha for long life of His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, as well as we will wish you for a very comfortable stay and safe journey tomorrow. Thank you so much.
The most respected senior officers from Central Tibetan Administration, I would like to apprise you all that Tawang is yet to come out of the mourn because recently we have lost three very important and prominent figures of our society. So we are very sorry we will not be able to present any kind of musical programs here, but right now I would like to request the artists of MIPA to present a musical tribute to His Holiness the 6th Dalai Lama Gyawat Sangeng Gyatso. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद नेपाल के कलाकारों को। और इसके बाद जैसे कि अपनी परंपरा रही है, अब इसके बाद यहाँ पर माननीय सिक्योंग और तमाम जो सम्मानित अतिथिगण हैं उनको सम्मानित किया जाना है। तो सबसे पहले मैं जिला प्रशासन की ओर से सम्मानित करने के लिए मैं तवांग के उपायुक्त महोदय को यहाँ मंच में आमंत्रित करना चाहूँगा। और मैं उपायुक्त महोदय से अनुरोध करूंगा कि आप माननीय सिक्योंग पेनपा त्सरिंग महोदय को यहाँ पर सम्मानित करने की कृपा करें।
साइज कैसे आपने बताया?
सर ये तो जस्ट आपका सिंबॉलिक है, आपके साइज में नहीं मिला।
Thank you.
This is pure
इसके बाद मोम्पा मेमंग सोक्पा की ओर से भी यहाँ पर सम्मानित किया जाना है, तो मैं सेक्रेटरी जनरल नवनीत सिंह सर को स्टेज में आमंत्रित करता हूँ।
아주 딱 고소라.
Yeah, photo please. Now I'd like to request Honorable Sikyong to kindly address the gathering.
I'm really, I'm really lost as to where I should begin. Well, I feel completely overwhelmed by the very warm reception that the administrators and leaders of Arunachal Pradesh gave us during this tour, not only treating us as a state guest by the Chief Minister Pema Khandula and his administration, but particularly also the warmth that came out of the people, all the people that I met during this visit. And I feel doubly warm now with this quote. So thank you very much for according us such a warm welcome, and it really strengthens our resolve that we are one and that we are there to help each other and we are there for each other. When DC Saab mentioned about how we were helpful to you, I was always thinking about how you have been helpful to us. So with this, I beg to apologize that since we had to travel to many different places, we have not been able to bring enough felicitation materials from Dharamsala. So I had one tanka for the DC Saab, but I don't know, it's somewhere misplaced. So we are going to offer the same tanka that we received today to honor the people of Arunachal Pradesh through DC Saab for their warmth. And during this whole visit, Chambe Undila had played a very important role in organizing the whole thing. And I'm also sorry to hear of all the losses that he suffered within the last 1 month. And I have met with this uncle, Tibettv, when I was in Pondicherry and when he was a minister in the state. So our relationship goes back very old. And Tibettv's brother, Dr. Lobsang Chambala, was in Pondicherry when I was there, and he did his MBBS and MD both in Jipmer. And he always had a very big heart for every patient that comes to him. Even when he was a student, he used to help us out through every thick and thin. And Jamil Ondila's father also passed away 3 weeks ago when I was in Rajgir. Even before that, in Rajgir, I heard about the sad news. And then when we were traveling, when we just about reached Arunachal Pradesh, then we heard about the untimely demise of Tibettv also. So these were some sad moments. But then as Buddhists, we believe in life after death. And I'm sure there must be a purpose for when they die. And we really pray for their early rebirth. And the only thing I could do was when visited Devakota in the Pemaka region near Tuting. That is the most sacred place around that area, and I offered prayers for the 3 who passed away in the recent past. So that is why I was also confused as to whether we should mourn first, or we should felicitate first, or I should be speaking first. And thank you, Jamila, for all the things that you have been doing in building the communities and bridging the communities, two communities together as chairman of the Religion and Culture. You have been doing a wonderful job reaching out to us, and for us also to reach out to you here. It makes it much easier on us when we already have friends like DC Kesanga, who was in Dharamsala several times, and we met in Dharamsala when I was Speaker of the House. And very recently, when people from Mon offered long life prayer to His Holiness Dalai Lama, I had the occasion to meet several of your leaders who were there, and also scores of students, young Monpas from this region, and I could interact with them, and I was told that that had been helpful. So I take this opportunity to thank the people of Arunachal Pradesh. Of course, I'll meet the Chief Minister tomorrow in Guwahati and personally express our gratitude to him tomorrow in Guwahati. But right now, in the form of DC Kesanga, I want to offer the same tanka that was offered to us.
This will be a precious collection in Padang. We'll offer to Padang. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, thank you. So, the one who offered this to us, I should not feel bad that your gift is being passed away to another person. There are some customs where they don't like it, but this now, since DC Sahib has announced that this will go to the Podang, and this has served all the purpose. So, which means you have offered this to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Okay, so the purpose of my visit to the Northeast is of course to meet with the communities where Tibetans live, and particularly in Arunachal Pradesh. We started with Tizu, then we went to Meo, and then to Tuting, Tenzigang, Bomdila, and now Tawang. So these are the 6 different places where there are a definite number of Tibetans, some larger, some scholars, some smaller, and some scattered, like Bomdila and Tawang. And this gave us a very good idea about how we should move forward in the future, because we are also facing a lot of challenges. As I was discussing with some of our Mumbai friends last night, even the Mumba population is also going down. And when we visited Tawang Monastery this morning, we were also talking about the number of young children who are joining the monastic order. And then if all the boys join the monastic order, we would have serious population in the future also. So we may have to plan this out, not necessarily take whatever comes in, but I think there should be, we should give serious thought. It's not just a joke. If we need to be perpetual in our growth and in sustainability of our community, then I think it's very important that we take the reality of the situation in mind and then plan for the future. That's very important. We have been witnessing this throughout, and Jambe Undila himself is responsible for this particular department, and he knows the exact number as to how many Arunachali monks and nuns are studying in Tibetan monasteries, and how many Penpa students are studying in Tibetan schools. The exact numbers are very much with him. But we have to challenge this, face these challenges together. Just as you are facing the problem with population, we also have serious problems with population, not just because of low birth rate, but also because of out-migration and less number of people coming from inside Tibet. Before 2008, we used to receive anything between 2,500 to 3,000 Tibetans every year in India, and many of them are small children, never knowing whether they will ever meet their families again or not. They are kept here for study, and that is why we had a large student population. When I look back into the statistics in 2012, we found that there were a little more than 20,128 Tibetans, to be exact, sorry, in 2012. In 2021, the Tibetan student population has gone down to 9,700. So in effect, we are talking about a decrease of an average of more than 1,000 Tibetan children every year. And the result, the causes are mainly because of less children coming from inside Tibet, out-migration of people moving out of India, Nepal, and Bhutan, and low birth rate that is happening all over the world. It's not just within our community. So based on that, we were also thinking about how we should reorganize ourselves. In the last 63 years, we managed to preserve our identity because of the help of the Indian government, both central and state, as well as the foresightedness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. When we came into exile, when His Holiness crossed Chutangmo here in Tawang, none of us, none of our parents thought that we will have to live in exile for this long. We thought that we'll get to go back in 2-3 years' time. During His Holiness the 13th Dalai Lama's period, His Holiness the 13th Dalai Lama also had to come into exile into India in 1910, and we managed to return back in 2 years, in 1912. And during 14th Dalai Lama's time, we also thought that we will get to go back in few years. Now it has already been 63 years. Now within these 63 years, the reason, even though our population is very small, just 130,000 Tibetans in exile, just because of the popularity of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, many people think that there are a large number of Tibetans in diaspora, which is not the case. We are only about 130,000, out of which I would safely say there are about 68,500 Tibetans in India, about 1,500 in Bhutan, and about 10,000 in Nepal now, which makes it 80,000 in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, and the rest of the 50,000 Tibetans in exile are in North America, Europe, Australia, now spread across more than 25 different countries. So with these changing situations, a lot of younger generations of Tibetans are moving out of the compact communities. In the last 63 years, we managed to preserve our language because of the schools set up by the Indian government for us, where we could teach Tibetan language as well. And then we managed to recreate all the monastic institutions in Tibet. Most of the major monasteries are recreated here in exile. And thereby we managed to preserve our religion. Then we also set up our cultural institutions, which DCSA was referred to, the Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts and all the local opera groups. And now wherever there are Tibetan parties, you see these korches, dances they do, and this also helps in preservation of our dance forms and artistic forms in many levels. Now this is being threatened because the younger generations are moving out. The age limit within which they could give birth and have productive labor, they are moving out because of less livelihood opportunities in the Tibetan communities, which are mostly rural areas. And we were also thinking about how to reset the school systems. So during this visit, we got a very good understanding of the population of Tibetans in each areas and how we need to move forward into the future. And it was so nice to see all the bonhomie between the locals and the Tibetans. After I took over the role of the Sikyong in May last year, there were many months where we could not travel because of pandemic. There were several months where we could have little time, and we also have to reach out to the international community. We have to reach out to every single settlement in India. Of course, I cannot travel to Nepal because of China's pressure. But despite all that, I managed to visit all the Tibetan settlements now, except for a few settlements in Himachal Pradesh. I've covered every single settlement, not just visiting and giving speeches, but I went to every single camp, every single institution, saw the buildings, saw every condition, also collected all the needs of the Tibetan people. Wherever we can, we should be helping them. And just as DCSA would agree with me, Arunachal Pradesh also has to always have to have their begging ball to the central government. And we also go with the begging ball to the international community for financial support, other than the political support that we always have to seek. So, yeah, our administration is very, very committed in giving a lot of importance to statistics, numbers. We are committed to creating the right structure and the right system, and what and how you do and how you prioritize your programs depends on the priority at that time, whoever comes in. So even though there are so many exiled communities in the world, we are unique because of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Indian government. So we have a democratic polity in Dharamsala. We have the cabinet with 7 ministerial posts and a Sikyong. Right now, in my cabinet, I'm the only male, and I seriously believe in women empowerment. And when I say women empowerment, then I link that with opportunities. So women empowerment or youth empowerment, of anything of that sort. If there are no opportunities, then there's no empowerment. Therefore, during my Sikyongship, right now we have 3 lady ministers, and I'm the only lone man in the cabinet. So till we have more cabinet ministers. Right now it's 75% women in the Tibetan cabinet. And some of the higher posts that we have are the officers of Tibet, the de facto or the de jure embassies of Tibet in 12 different countries. When I came in, there was not a single man in the highest post. Right now we have 3 ladies, and I am committed to bring it up to 6, at least 50%. So we have a cabinet there. And under the cabinet, we have 7 departments: the Religion and Culture Department, with 288 monasteries and nunneries registered under it. And there are about 42,000 monks and nuns in all the monasteries. But the Religion and Culture Department does not interfere in the running of the administration of the monastic institutions, because there are established, age-old, centuries-old, established, institutionalized working system, which we don't interfere, and they manage their own affairs, including finance. So, as I said before, out of 42,000, 66% are from the Himalayan region, and 33% Tibetans, and 1% non-Tibetan, non-Himalayan, mostly Mongolians. So that is the composition of the monastic order today. So from this itself, you will understand that even though we are refugees, we do provide religious education to people from independent countries in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, with all the facilities, about 28,000 of them. And then we have this department for home, where we have to be responsible for rehabilitation of all the Tibetan settlements. Even though there has been a lot of development, people's needs are also becoming more costly. And then we have, as DC Saab mentioned, the health department, where we have both allopathic and Tibetan medicine. And those also needs to be streamlined. I have been having some meetings. I've also called some meetings of Tibetan Medical Institute and Astrological Department. And now, since Sowa Rigpa has been recognized by the Ayush, there are more institutions coming up. But it does not help only to have more institutions coming up and more doctors coming up. We need facilities. So we also need herbal medicines to supply to all these doctors. So we need to have a concerted, cooperative and coordinated effort in making this not a problem amongst us, but to work in coordination with each other. I think that is very that is very essential going into the future. And we also have a department for finance. I won't go into too much detail. Of course, our finances are the sources of our finances are very varied. And if it is only one source, then it's very easy for China to strangle us. So it's governments, it's institutions, it's individuals, a whole lot of people who follow His Holiness, who have faith in His Holiness, who believe in His Holiness, and the Tibetan people who support us. And out of our annual outlay, planned outlay, only 9% comes from the Tibetans themselves. 91% we still go with a begging bowl. So you from this itself you would get a understanding of how we run our government. We always have to reach out. Then education, I already dwelt a little bit on this, from 20,000 to 9,700. Now into the future we have to look into how we need to integrate these schools and to create better facilities. Looking at the reality of the numbers of Tibetans that are being born every year. Now we are talking about 500 new births every year. So do we need all these number of schools? Can we integrate these schools or not? So those are some of the issues that are facing us. And then we have Department for Security, Department for Information and International Relations, under which we have Tibet Policy Institute with scholars and researchers. And then I also have a section in the Cabinet Secretariat to handle political issues. So after I came in, we streamlined how we should go about this, like a factory working process. We have not paid enough attention on the reality of the situation inside Tibet for some time now. And till we reach a stage, or till there is a resolution on the Sino-Tibet conflict through the middle way approach, we have to study and understand the reality of the situation inside Tibet. Right now, it's very grim. Many people ask us as to how the Uyghur problem has become escalated and why you don't hear much about Tibet. Even though you live in Tibet, I don't know how informed you are about what is happening inside Tibet. If any of you have heard of this book called 1984 by George Orwell, written sometime in 1959 or so, then he talks about a dystopian society. Everything controlled by the government, and this is exactly happening inside Tibet today, where the government controls everything. So the surveillance, the level of surveillance on the people is very, very high. They use all kinds of artificial intelligence, including facial recognition, electronic identification, so they GPS location, everything. So now we hear news about the Chinese government collecting DNA samples from Tibetans. Out of a little more than 6 million Tibetans, they have already collected more than 1 million DNA samples. We don't know what that's going to be used for. What comes out from Tibet is that these are for social control and security measures. And these are definitely not for medical research or curing ailments of the Tibetans. It's definitely for political control of the Tibetans. And the system that was created by the same party secretary who was later transferred to East Turkestan or Uyghur. I don't like to call them Xinjiang because that is the name given by the Chinese government. When Chinese government thinks about sinification or sinicization, it's not only at the level of changing the personality of the person, but also changing names of places. If you are aware of what China is doing on Arunachal Pradesh, China has already named Arunachal Pradesh places in their language. So if you go into Google, you won't know what they are talking about or which place they are talking about in Arunachal Pradesh. So if you are caught sending out any information from inside Tibet, you land into serious problem. If you receive any information, but if you still don't redistribute it, you're still safe. If you redistribute the information, you go to jail. There's no other way, right? And the system that is introduced by the same party secretary who introduced all these state-engineered industrial scale concentration camps in Uyghur was the party secretary in Tibet. And he introduced the gridlock system. Now, if Chambela is living in Lhasa, if I come from a rural area, either I have to live with him as a friend or I live in a hotel. If I live in a hotel, of course, I can be tracked through the electronic identification system. If I live with him, then if I commit a political action, then his whole family will also suffer. So it's not only me. I can't think only about myself. So there have been already 158 cases of self-immolations inside Tibet. There was a time in 1963 when one single monk burned himself to death in Vietnam, and the Vietnam issue became a huge global issue. But even after 158 self-immolations by Tibetans, hoping against hope that the Chinese government will pay some attention to their plights, hoping against hope that the international community will come to their rescue, has not resulted in anything yet. But I believe that their sacrifices will not go in vain. So the situation continues to be very, very grim, very controlled, where you are not able to do anything. If I think about self-immolating myself today, I can die, I may get scarred for life. But I have to think about all my family, other family members who will suffer with me because of my action. And that is the kind of control that Chinese government has introduced. The monastic institutions where we used to have thousands and thousands of monks today are reduced to several hundreds, where their movements are controlled. You need at least 5-6 permits to travel from places to places, where it used to be free for every religious teacher to travel to any part of Tibet when Tibet was independent. Now the Chinese government, who does not believe in religion, wants to be responsible for recognition of reincarnation of what they call as living with us or for us. to Gosa Lamas. For why? In 2007, they introduced this measure. And since then, their focus is on the next Dalai Lama, the 15th Dalai Lama, to use this measure as a political tool to recognize the 15th Dalai Lama and try to convince the world that that's the real Dalai Lama. And His Holiness has always, in good humor, said if the Chinese government is really serious about reincarnation, they should study Tibetan Buddhism first. Because it's not with every Buddhism that you have the same system. The reincarnation system is very unique to Tibetans over more than 900 years. Right? Then His Holiness also justly, with jest, says that if Chinese government is really serious about reincarnation, they should look for Mao Zedong's reincarnation first. Deng Xiaoping's reincarnation second. Then maybe the Dalai Lamas. You know, and His Holiness has a special affinity for people in Mon. You never know whether His Holiness will be born here or Ladakh. Because His Holiness has always said, I'll be born in a free world. And Lamas are born where they have very good human bonding, personal relationship between the gurus and the Shishyas. And His Holiness also has a special bonding with the people in Ladakh. So these two could be possible places where His Holiness may be born in future. But China wants to be responsible for the recognition of the 15th Dalai Lama, whereas they don't care about the existing 14th Dalai Lama. So everybody knows what the intentions are. Everybody also understands why the 11th Panchen Lama, who was only 6 years old, was abducted, taken out of his hometown. And we still don't know whether he's alive or not. Whether every time international community asked the Chinese government said he doesn't want to be disturbed. And he's studying well. Now he must be 32, 33 years old. We still don't know. I'm sure he feels Chinese government, if he is alive, would have incapacitated him to take up the religious responsibilities that he ultimately has to take if he's alive. So all these issues confounds us as to how opaque the Chinese system can be. But we never lose hope. We cannot lose hope. Once we lose hope, then our efforts will not be there. If our efforts are not there, then the cause will also die a natural death. That is why His Holiness over the last 63 years have inspired us, led us in a wise manner. Now it is incumbent upon us, the Tibetan people, and its supporters. That's why wherever I go, I tell them, we need your support more than ever before. Earlier we used to have His Holiness, we have His Holiness, going around the world with his folded hands, you know, and we have a lot of support. Now that His Holiness we just celebrated his 87th birthday, and now with age, he will not be able to travel as much as he used to do before. So now it is a challenge for us, the Tibetan community and its supporters, to live up to His Holiness' expectations. I'm just one person, or my cabinet is just four people right now. So there has to be a concerted, cooperative effort. I even tell the Europeans, don't look at us only from a perspective of a victim of Chinese communism. Look at us from a point of a partner if you want to bring about positive changes in China. You need both external and internal forces to bring about changes. And we can be a good internal force to bring China, to bring positive changes in China. So this situation inside, it's not just, I think one of the issues that people in Arunachal, Pradesh and Assam are also directly concerned is the environment of Tibet. I hope you understand the seriousness of the impact of global climate change that's happening on Tibet. Environmental scientists say that the speed or the level of change that's happening on the Tibetan plateau is twice the speed of climate change that's happening in any other part of the world. But there are no international environmental scientists to monitor Tibet's environment. We call ourselves, in our prayers, Karirawe Kowe Shingamjong, the heavenly abode, the land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. I read a book written in 1906 by an American who lived in Sichuan province in China, and one of the chapters was Roof of the World. I don't know whether they started calling Tibet Roof of the World from that time or earlier, but the Westerners started calling Tibet the Roof of the World because of its altitude of an average of 12,000 feet above sea level. And this time, last time when I was in Japan, I was talking with the students there, and I told them the highest mountain in Japan, your Mount Fuji, is like base camp in Tibet. Now the Asians call Tibet the water tower of Asia. Chinese environmental scientists have picked up one word used by another person, I think way back in 1963, to call Tibet the third pole. Why the third pole? From North Pole, South Pole, and Tibet Pole. Because Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost that feeds all the major rivers in Asia, in Southeast Asia and East Asia. Indus that flows into India and Pakistan, Brahmaputra, the Sikyong that flows into your state and into Bangladesh. And China is building a mega dam. As we were coming from Meo to Pasighat and Pasighat to Tuding, and again on the way back, we could see that the Sikyong is like tea. And rest of the tributaries that were joining Sikyong were blue, clear water, which means to say that there are a lot of activities happening inside Tibet. Even this is not rainy season right now. So we were told that they are building a dam twice the size of Three Gorges, which is the biggest in the world. And the Himalayan region is a seismic zone. If something happens to the size of that kind of a dam, what is going to happen to all the downstream people in Assam and Bangladesh? Many will perish. Then the rivers that go into Burma, like Irrawaddy, the Mekong into Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam. These are main lifeline for these countries. And then the two rivers that go into China, the Huanghe and the Huanghe, which is the Yellow River, and the Yangtze. These two are the lifelines for China. One river that flows from Tibet into northern China, and one river that flows from Tibet into southern China. And for the first time, if you have been following the stories, news, the Yangtze dried up about 2-3 months ago. So this is not going to have serious consequences only for the Tibetans, but the whole region. And some people say that the Third World War can happen because of water. Water security is becoming a big issue. And the rivers that originate from Tibet and that flows into the countries are one of the most densely populated areas in the world. And some estimate that 1.8 billion out of the 7 billion people in this world has either directly or indirectly something to do with rivers that originate from Tibet. That's why sometimes when I speak to Western audiences or political leaders, I tell them today we are political refugees. Tomorrow there could be many more environmental refugees. COP meeting is already going on in Egypt. China is saying big things in the meeting. But the reality of the situation inside China is totally different. They consume 50% of the world's coal production. And you can imagine the pollution that emanates from there. So some of these issues, like the environmental issues, should be a concern for the whole region. Right now, not everybody is in a position to speak up to China. I've always said, I told the Westerners also when I travel outside and speak to them, I tell them, if you want to be the pony, then so be it. China will keep riding you, you know. And we also have this Tibetan expression, I think, which is common here also, the stone and the butter story. You hit the stone at the butter loses. You hit butter at the stone, the butter loses. If all the Western countries think that they are losers, if they are the butter, then so be it. But the reality is not that. This time when I was in Sweden, I was telling them in July alone, you exported more than $8.54 billion worth of Chinese products, whereas you exported only $5.34 billion. You're talking about $3 billion of foreign exchange deficit in 1 month, which is 36 billion in 1 year. And if that keeps accumulating, then you can imagine the kind of foreign exchange reserve that China accumulates. Even with India, despite all the rhetoric that's happening in the United States or Europe or Japan or India, everywhere, business with China is not going down, it's going up. If it doesn't go down, it's not going to have a real impact on China. Right? So these are some of the issues that we face us inside Tibet, and we believe that we should study all this situation very well and then tell the world as to what is happening there. And the kind of transnational repression that China is exercising, if you read today's newspapers and watch the news, then they are talking about Chinese embassies establishing police stations in different countries. How can that happen? You know, now the world is waking up to the reality. And when we tell them, then they say, okay, now we realize. And we have been speaking about China for the last 40, 50 years to the international community. And of course, when they agree with us that they realize, we do feel vindicated, but vindication alone does not bring solution. So on the case of Tibet also, we follow the middle way approach of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which is a very pragmatic approach for mutually beneficial, negotiated, lasting solution for Tibet and the Tibetan people, which will also help the Chinese people. And Tibet has traditionally played the role of a buffer with 2.3 million square kilometers of land between India and China, the two most populous nations in the world. And if Tibet gains genuine autonomy through the middle way approach, we will, and we can, in future also, play the role of a peacemaker and build better relations. Whether we like it or not, we cannot lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere in the Pacific or Atlantic. We are not Hanumans. You know, we have to live together. That's the reality, whether we like it or not. So if we have to live together, why not live in peace with each other? We have lived with each other together since time immemorial. You know. So these days I also tell that how we, even though we follow the middle way approach of seeking a genuine autonomy for Tibet, the strategy that we are following is still different from what my predecessors followed. Now, I have been calling on the international community to get some recognition or recognizing the fact of an independent Tibet in its historical context. Now we tell governments, of course I can go back a little bit, His Holiness' position whenever it comes to negotiation with Chinese government asks His Holiness to say or put this precondition for His Holiness to say that Tibet is a part of People's Republic of China and that Taiwan is also a part of People's Republic of China. Now what has Taiwan got to do with us? Taiwan is a totally different entity. How can we decide for Taiwanese people? And His Holiness is a Buddhist monk, as he calls himself. He cannot lie. So he comes up with a very generous answer saying that I'm not a historian. Let's leave history to historians. What concerns us is the future of the Tibetan people. So not going against that also, in the last 2 years, there have been 2 publications, aside from the many publications that Tibet has already had about the independent status of Tibet, historically. So one is by Michael van Walt van Praag. If you are interested, you can read his book. It's called Tibettv 2020. And he published this book about 2 years ago. And it is a result of 8 years of hard work, working with some 70, 80 different scholars from Inner Asia, many countries in Inner Asia. And he establishes the fact that whether it's Tibet-Mongol relation, or Tibet-Ming relation, or Tibet-Qing relation, or as per international law today, Tibet has never been considered part of China. So when we talk about Tibet-Mongol relation, we are not talking about Songtsen Gampo and all the 3 religious kings during 7th to 9th century. We are talking about post-disintegration of Tibet, when the Sakyas ruled Tibet, and Sakyas developed a relationship with Kublai Khan, and Sakya Pandita's relationship with Kublai's father, Altan Khan. We had relations with the Mongols much before Mongols invaded China and became the Yuan dynasty in Chinese context. So the Mongols existed even before the Yuan and even after the Yuan. But for Chinese historians, the Yuan is only that Mongol dynasty that ruled China for that period, up to 1368. Then that was followed by the Ming dynasty. During the Ming dynasty, we had 3 dynasties. We had the Pamutuwa dynasty, we had the Rinpoche dynasty, and we had the Tibettv dynasty. In these almost 300 years, between 1368 to 1644, we didn't have much relation with the Ming dynasty, who are the real Han Chinese dynasty. Then the 5th Dalai Lama took over the temporal and spiritual leadership in 1642. 2 years after that, China was invaded by the Manchus. If you watch Kung Fu movies, Chinese Kung Fu movies, Chinese are always the protagonists, and Manchus are always the antagonists. Why so? That is the societal perspective of how Han Chinese see Manchus, not as Chinese. Of course, there are a lot of, I heard about a lot of academic discourses that were happening in China as to who is the real Chinese. If the Mongols are also Chinese, then they can claim half of the world because Genghis Khan invaded half of the world. Yeah. So sometimes, you know how many stars are there on Chinese national flag. There are 5 stars, and one is a little bigger. Conventionally, Chinese national flag is one such national flag that does not have an official description. But some also interpret the 5 stars as the bigger one as the Han Chinese. The other 4 stars as Manchus, Uyghurs, Mongols, and Tibetans. Now in Manchuria, there are hardly any people who speaks the Manchukuo language. So it's already time to remove 1 star from the Chinese national flag. And if you look at what China calls as Inner Mongolia, they don't like to be called as Inner Mongolia. They call themselves Southern Mongolia. And in Southern Mongolia, now they are only 18% of the population. The rest are all Turks and Han people. So their story is almost gone. It's time to remove a 2nd star from the Chinese national flag. Then comes the Uyghurs and the Tibetans. You know, how long will it take to remove those 2 stars also? Then only 1 star will remain, which conforms to what Xi Jinping is saying today: 1 nation, 1 culture, 1 language, at the expense of language and culture of all other national minorities or nationalities in China. So now I tell the international community that if you keep repeating this statement at the behest of the Chinese government that Tibet is part of People's Republic of China, then you're going against international law. Because the only one agreement that we have with the Chinese government, the communist government, is the 17-point agreement. That was signed in May 1951. That was preceded by the forceful occupation of Tibet in October 1950, when they invaded Chamdo. Under international law, any agreement post-aggression is not valid. If that law has to apply to everybody, how can it not be applied to the Tibetan cause as well? Then I also tell them, on one hand, almost all the nations keep saying Tibet is part of PRC, and then on the other hand, maybe to appease us or to appease His Holiness, they say that we support negotiation between the representative of His Holiness and the Chinese government. And I tell them, these two are not going together. These are contradicting each other. Because Chinese government ruled Tibet with an iron hand, and then the whole international community keeps saying that Tibet is part of PRC, which means you say that you do whatever you want in China, Tibet, and we don't care. And then I also ask them, who are you to give legitimacy to China to rule Tibet? All through history, we remained isolated for many centuries on the roof of the world. And then everybody else decided for us, not even consulting us. You know. So and today, even without consulting us, everybody says Tibet is part of PRC. Then what do they know about Tibetan history? What right do they have to decide for the Tibetan people? I tell them, you cannot decide for us. So when China is ruling Tibet with an iron hand and the whole international community is forced to say Tibet is part of PRC, then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? That is why now I tell the international community that there should be a recognition of Tibet's historical status. And one of the things after I came as Sikyong, starting from this year, February, our Minister for Information and International Relations went to the United States and started the initial discussions. In April, I went there. We had meetings with the Speaker Pelosi and many other leaders, congressional leaders, and also with the State Department. And then we decided to have experts' testimony on the historical status of Tibet. So now I can say proudly that for the first time, in the congressional records of the United States government, the historical status of Tibet is documented. It's recorded. On the same line, they have also moved a bill, because the United States is the only government that has an act on Tibet, where the State Department has to report to the Congress every year. So now they have moved, declaring disinformation, challenging disinformation of China's historical narrative on Tibet, and declaring Tibet as an unresolved conflict. So these are some things we have managed to achieve. Europeans are just waking up to the reality. I was in Japan. Japan knows about the situation much better than any other country because they have maritime boundary with China. And the world's perception is changing. But the question is, how would that perception translate into the ground reality in terms of policies and programs? I think we are running short of time, so I'll stop here. And if you have any questions on anything that I know, I'll be happy to respond. So thank you very much for your attentive listening attentively.
Good evening, respected Sikyong Penpa Tsering and other delegates from CTA Dharamsala. I have a question to Sikyong, but before I put my question to you, I have a small thought to share first. This is regarding, my thought is regarding the reincarnation of the future Dalai Lama. As you said, the future reincarnation, His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says that his reincarnation, if the Tibet problem is not solved before when he is alive, then his reincarnation will definitely come into a free world. So then, thinking that most probably people say that his reincarnation may be somewhere in the Himalayan belt, most probably say Ladakh and Tawang. So now, if reincarnation comes to Tawang, my thought is it will be this thing interesting point to view that China, in one hand, they claim that Tawang is south of Tibet, and they sometimes claim that Tawang is part of China. And if the future Dalai Lama reincarnation comes to Tawang, then it would be very interesting to see, because normally what happens, the reincarnation of Lama comes in a free world, then China, on the other hand, they bring up their own version of reincarnation. So if the future Dalai Lama reincarnation comes to Tawang, that will put China into a very difficult situation. Now, whether they will bring up their Dalai Lama from the occupied Chinese government, or they will say that Tawang is not a part of this thing, China. So this is my thought. So on that as a basis that we, the people of Mon, are thinking that the future Dalai Lama's reincarnation may be possible to come in Mon area. As already one Dalai Lama, the 6th Dalai Lama, has taken reincarnation in Mon area. So we are looking forward to have one more Dalai Lama in future from Mon area. This was my thought. Now my question to you is, as you said that the number of students coming from Tibet is now reducing, almost nil now. And then the monasteries and the Tibetan institutes are mostly filled by the students and monks from the Himalayan belt, say from Arunachal Pradesh, then you have West Bengal, then we have Sikkim government, also from maybe some from Nepal. So my question to you is, do you have any plan to discuss with these governments to take kind of a shared responsibility in terms of running these institutions, because these institutions are mostly filled by the children of this area? Thank you.
Reflecting on your thought, I also want to mention that even if the 15th Dalai Lama is born on the periphery of the Himalayan region, there's no reason to fear that China's claim on Arunachal Pradesh and His Holiness being born here would have its impacts, because there are already precedents of the 4th Dalai Lama being born in Mongolia, but that does not necessarily give claim of territory over Mongolia. So His Holiness could be born anywhere where he decides to be born, where he believes that this would be the best place for him to be born, or best parents for him to be born. There will be many other criteria which we ordinary people may not know. So as Central Tibetan Administration, we have come out with a position paper on reincarnation, and right now the concern should be more on what His Holiness had said earlier about the continuation of the institution of the Dalai Lama. So anybody who believes in His Holiness can pass resolutions for requesting His Holiness to allow for the continuation of the institution of the Dalai Lama. That would be something more fitting as of today, because His Holiness has said since 1969 that whether there should be a 15th Dalai Lama or not, will be decided by the Tibetan people. So it's now, after so many years, it's not just the Tibetan people. He has so many followers all around the world. And anybody who believes in this 14th Dalai Lama, if they can pass similar resolutions requesting His Holiness for the continuation of the institution of the Dalai Lama, that I think would be fitting at this point of time. And from CTA's point of view, we will also not have, just like any other government, whether it's Chinese or Indian or even us, we will not have anything to do with the process of the selection, because that is a totally spiritual process, a religious process, and that will be handled as per the instructions that His Holiness gives and the responsibilities that he would entrust to anybody that he thinks fit. So apart from that, other protocol matters that we will have to take care, we are preparing for it. Now, with regard to the Kaza, I
said now the children are mostly from the Himalayan belt.
Yes. Oh, yes, I remember. Shared responsibility. No, this was one of the issues that I raised in the Tibetan Parliament, raised in the sense I did inform the Parliament about the present status, as I was mentioning about the 42,000, and last time there was some proposal from the Ladakh MP, Sikyong Penpa Tsering, about the certification of the monks in the monastic order. And if they continue to remain in the monastic order and gain their degrees, there may be some ways of finding an equivalence to that in the near future, because people are already exploring equivalence and recognition of these degrees. But for smaller children who may or may not be able to continue with their monkhood into the future, if they are not able to continue, they will have to continue with a normal layman's life. And for that, some certification is necessary for them to join other schools. So those are also issues that we have been talking about. Now, talking about other things, these numbers of 28,000, 6,000, all that. The monasteries are sustaining now because of the efforts of the elder generation of the monks and the management committee of the monasteries. And if it continues in the same manner that it does today, then there's no threat to the sustainability. But if it does not continue in the manner that it used to be today, then there could be serious problem in the continuation of the sustainability of these monastic orders. We can already see the changes that are happening, like in Ladakh, when I went to Tikse Rinpoche's monastery. Now you have Gishil Harambas who have graduated from South India and now serving in Ladakh. And some others are starting their own monasteries or centers. So likewise, I also see this trend here. So Himalayan students are now graduating and coming out. And now when I was in Bumdila, it's heartening to find that they train the young ones here. Then they're at certain age, with a certain degree, they send them down to Trebon Losiling to study further and then come back. So these systems also need to evolve in such a way that all these institutions survive. Because the ultimate objective of His Holiness the Dalai Lama is to turn these religious centers into something like what Nalanda used to be, where anybody can come and study Buddhism. Or in modern terms, to turn these institutions as international Buddhist studies centers. So these monasteries should not be belonging only to Tibetans or the Himalayas. It should be belonging to anybody who wants to attain enlightenment. And for the sustainability of these, the reason why I mentioned Sikyong Penpa Tsering is because I cannot decide for the Himalayan children. The Himalayan leadership should also decide for what should happen to the Himalayan children. And I'm glad to hear that Jamewandila, the department from the state government, is giving some stipend to the monks and nuns from Arunachal Pradesh studying in different parts, different parts of the monasteries in different parts of the states. And if there has to be a future sustenance, then the state governments also should look into the matter of looking after the welfare of their own children. You know, at one time, Ladakh didn't have much budget when it was under Jammu Kashmir. Now they have become union territory and they have a lot more budget than before. So they can, you know, pay for some of the expenses of their children who are studying in the monasteries or their children who are studying in the Tibetan schools. But we can continue to go with the same cooperation in terms of institution, you know, so that we will be able to carry forward the same traditional way of educating people with cooperation with each other. And as you said, I already told Jame Wanila also to speak with his counterparts in other states to see whether they can do similar things as what Arunachal is doing for its monks and nuns in other states, you know. So if this can be done by all other states, then there's less burden on the monastic order. So this will definitely, I think, if the state governments are willing to contribute to the sustainability of these institutions, it will greatly help, and we definitely intend to reach out to the chief ministers of the respective states and see if they are responsive to this idea or not.
My question is very precise. As you have mentioned about the Tibetan history, and also the link between the Himalayan region and with the Tibetan diaspora, what is disheartening is that, like, okay, we all know that the situation inside Tibet, it's very disheartening and very, you know, like unbearable situation we have. But now in the recent past, what we have noticed and seen, and including myself, and in my affinity, in my experience, I have come with a lot of Tibetan friends, Himalayan friends also. So there is a lot of regionalism, I'm very unfortunate I have to say this, and sectarian. So as a Sikyong, how do you see Tibetan, outside Tibet in the near years to come? Because politically, religiously, and in a lot of manners we are together. So it worries a lot for all of us in the international community. So I would like to know from you, where do you see the Tibetan diaspora, and especially in the Tibetan cause from in the coming near future? I want to know from this.
This is, as I mentioned, about the challenges that we're facing in terms of sustainability of the communities. There are also opportunities for us. Many of the youngsters who have gone out into the Western world, now they have become citizens of those countries. They have learned the language, they understand the system. That is why we decided to come out with a new campaign program called the Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group, mainly to harness the power of the youth, of the Tibetan youth in different countries. Then they can advocate, they can initiate diplomatic relations or whatever, in sense, lobby for Tibet in their respective countries, because they function on a totally different level. So that is how we intend to keep them aware of the situation. If they undertake those jobs, then they have to understand the situation inside Tibet. And that will instill more responsibility in the Tibetan youth. And that will also help in developing organic leadership within the Tibetan community, that can come from any part of the world, doesn't matter. So we cannot stop certain changes that are happening. It's happening, it's not possible for us to do anything about it, but then when I say we give a lot of importance to statistics, then we look at the statistics and see how changes are happening, what changes are happening, and what could be the challenges in the near future or in the distant future, and how do we handle those? How do we take precautionary measures for all those, or what initiatives, what new initiatives do we need to take? It's not possible to reach out to all the diaspora community. So there are also concepts like creating Tibetan communities outside. So we already started some discussions on this, starting from Minnesota. The Minnesota Tibetan community is about 3,000 strong or so, and they already have community center just outside the downtown Minnesota city. It's only 30 minutes from there. So if we can have a bigger area of, say, 1,000 acres or 500 acres, then we can have a compact community there. So similarly, if this is successful, then there are also ideas about starting charter schools. In the United States, you have this option to start charter schools where you can teach your own curriculum. Could be parts state-sponsored and all. So all these options are there. But then again, coming down to the practical level, there are so many questions that when they raised this issue in Minnesota, we did discuss, and there was quite a number of questions. I said, make a checklist of all this. Once we get tick all these checklists, then we can go on a practical level. So there are many ideas, but then it takes time for the ideas to germinate and for people's participation also, and to take it to a fruition level. But everything needs to be considered, and that's why we are there for the long haul if needs to be.
I have a very simple question from a very layman's perspective. During the course of your discourse, you have mentioned that during 1910, during the year 1910, Tibet was annexed. In a period of 2 years, you were able to go back to your own land. During the reign of His Holiness Pradesh Dalai Lama, as you have mentioned in your discourse, that it's already been 60 years of exile. So I see that the independence and the freedom of Tibet seems to be a far distant dream. Furthermore, the international community, the support of international community seems to be half-hearted, because they also don't want to spoil or ruin their relation with People's Republic of China. So considering such scenario, so you as Sikyong, how do you see Tibet attaining freedom in days to come, sir?
So now it depends on how you view the situation, from a positive aspect or a negative aspect. That is why I still keep insisting on saying that we should not lose hope. And we are all Buddhist, and we believe in the law of impermanence. And Western psychologists also term this in a different way, that change is the only constant. So change will have to come. That's why sometimes we also challenge the Chinese by saying, let us see whether His Holiness the Dalai Lama outlives the Communist Party or the Communist Party outlives His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Change has to come. Because now you see from outside, you see a very strong China. But there are also many chinks in the armor of China. Many believe, of course, China is very strong politically, militarily, economically, but they don't have any strength in moral power. Nobody trusts them. And right now, there are so many problems that China has to counter. For one, I say they are very, very insecure. I don't know whether you know or not, but the Chinese Politburo members, the standing committee members of 7 Politburo members, not more than 3 members can meet together without the express permission of the president. That convention used to be there, but it was reinforced more during Xi Jinping's period. So what does that imply? That implies they are afraid of internal coup. And you yourself saw on television as to how former President Hu Jintao was taken out of the party Congress. There's definitely something very fishy in there, And then, during Xi Jinping's time, he made sure that all the military generals don't stay in one place for more than 1 year, so that the generals don't build a better relation with the cadres that could propel military coups. That's the level of insecurity we're talking about. And China is the only government in this world who spends more money on internal security than external security. What does that manifest? A deep distrust between the rulers and the ruled. Otherwise, why do you need to spend so much money on controlling your own people? Everything is aimed at control, 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 control. Yeah. And then why these belligerents in Ladakh? Unprovoked belligerents from China's side. because they have to keep some hotspots burning. Why all this rhetoric on Taiwan? They have to keep that hotspot burning. Then all the issues related to South China Sea and its maritime disputes with all these countries in Southeast Asia. So when a threat comes to the survival of the Communist Party, then they may use one of these hotspots to attack so that they can instill nationalism among the Chinese people so that communism does not fall. That is the level of insecurity we are talking about. And the economic challenges that China is facing right now, on the very first day of the Party Congress on 16th October, when he reiterated his position on Taiwan, not desisting from use of force, and then deciding to continue with the zero COVID policy. And if this COVID situation increases inside China, this is going to have serious consequences economically, not just the housing problems and the Evergrande housing problems and the banking problems and all those innumerable problems they have, and a lot of misadventures in the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative programs, where all around us we see Pakistan falling apart, Sri Lanka falling apart, Cambodia going almost into 40% debt with China. They may have to sell their Sihanoukville port to China. So China will slowly start acquiring land in place of the money they have invested. And it's not just the BRI. Now they have started installing military people to guard the rails, like in Pakistan, because there are threats from Balochistan people. You know, so China is not as strong as what everybody would love to believe. So there are also many chinks in the armor. And Xi Jinping now assuming the role of the co-leader comparable to Mao's period, with all the three positions in his hand, or eventually coming in March, when he will again be designated as president of China. On one hand, if he does good things, it's good for everybody. And if he uses his common sense of not necessarily controlling people in an authoritarian way, or what they ideologists call as neo-authoritarianism. Yeah. But if he fails, he will have to take all the responsibility also. And China is a very large country. Anything can trigger anything. And as Buddhists, we also believe in different causes and conditions that will lead to events, you know, that will bring change. So change is the only constant. With that belief, I never lose hope. And I also tell others not to lose hope. Even though the international community is half-hearted in its support for Tibet. But as I said before, they are waking up to the reality. Things may change. Things have to change. There is no other way. So we remain hopeful. We have to keep going.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sikyong. तो आशा उम्मीद हमको बनाए रखनी है. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद हम Honorable Sikyong को करते हैं. और इसके बाद एक और यहाँ पर म्यूजिकल ट्रिब्यूट है श्रद्धांजलि पवन चरित्र नाम को.
John
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to request Honorable Chairman Doka to present a vote of thanks.
So everybody was speaking English. For a change, I must speak in Tibetan. Since it's a vote of thanks, and it will come all from my heart. Tadring Damshe, Tangaran Samelana Muti, Conso Jamurim Sholuja, one the Pibitone, and it goes out yogi, that Mangzo, young Dabarjing Razal Chick, Pibitito Nala, Sorenangbuki, Kushanabla, Suemi took Beijing. Any Pandin Sikyong, Gitsobe, any Konyamala, Nanda, Pege, Tungbanabare, Tunglere, Sanigonzinre, Barbare, any Gadung, and Galtown, Gitongbun, Casangol Tamalare, any Mamba Mimon Soba, Secretary General Namgitring Lare, any Genuba number. Any Shushab number, Shude Mam Soba, and drink de Sogala, Peggy Tangma, mix any Momotoka Soba, Lani, Tangaran the Arunachal Gi, Nadishungi, Kushupemo Kandala Cho, Maze, any Arunachal, Cherry Lagoon down, Narangi Gegumane, any Sikyong la, Pivotal Kasor down, Tuchi. Tachir Tame Kensere, Taco Sikyong Penpa Tsering la, Sikyongi, and Kubyali page, that law, Chicklass to Gure. The Yimi, any da Jangshar, Mando Jaga Giongi, Arunachal Re, Mumane, Peg Cheshiore, in the dot that was Jadi to your Mares. He may and the ring dangos the pay to the some shiragas shui, mix the sugar tramsalanga, tang mamuch a jagiore, and equalanium de camerabdan mamujun sare, mix it and on the Arunachal knowledge, Tabina, Ta Pabacalacasam giore, that judging miaure, dejure, and Tenziganche, and the Cadol Chashabe, and the Tawang, and the Bundelaji, Itanakache, Calcasam giore. That delicate should die Gardos and da Quesigola, Shavsa Koto with the Crowd in Magic Semshu, that same magic that parade catching at them red. Mix it down around the men down any Purple Paralchic, two mogging around the chick, the Carp Sugar chick relation yore, D. Nadek on Rado da New Minagi, the Mombajim when Narayana Semshu Pars, Semshara Pars, mix it and the Sikyong Lagi, that. Kalab, Jaibu, things are both. Any boy, Lugi Tolere, Tanashingi, Dangarazo, Himalayan regular, Cheda, Rishungi, Tanda Pevedangarozic, Kalshurik, Tamsavi with the title is Sapiana Shui, and Mount Chinje, Tanda that who is Sikyongi, Tone, CDA, Umitic Zugi, Cheshikarim, Kalakasam, so, Marine, that Monchiong, it's up Shuje, and then Chalam Molam Shui. Maze tanda ngaran sama ta nomginga shugiore ta ngaran sama chik chaksa tensa ngaran zol chik power chesa ngaran zo kosa kyabore muchi tanda shushebe kapsu ngaran zo inne chik 전주비 chik imengone ani bebennyamdo garto chik tullam진 대대 베게 전부 동두스 마세 tanda choirukshun tole shunde shubi inare tanda gyagar geonala tanda tanda koisigyala sundashire ngandu mombo kala kasam chik yore Mate the Chigi Kaka Chik Tabi in the Bobe Yeso, Yeso Karsata, Chito Nala, Momokalatum Chik, Zubrets, Zuden than the Shugures, Salong and Nangiorwa. Mate than the Chik around to the Arunachal Shungi when the Chik Shubi in Tangumang and Tanda, Dojigan Sapshage, Tanda Chik, Chitama, Sonarum Jere, and go to Kalakasam Chik, Bobinium the Tawabi Ore. Himine that Kasoji Sugar Kandu and Tanda Tito Yube, Jeep in the Chicago Pemacandula, Tawanga, Tanda Shubshin and Locates to do, one Jangnegi, Krongida, same with Tingne, 법을 시자 지동 당 구샵 요레스 띵원도 뭐 참에 캔거에 내당직에 맞에 법에 지도 나래 디치 단다 참에 캔세레스 디슈에 안 마음벌이 있는 딜레 당안도 다 소소기 제버디 야스 조에게 아니 상막이 냠룹체니디 겐디 랭고에 계신 동고도 디슈에 안 단다 드링 믹세 다 동안 건발에 다가 난신기 우글링레 아니 이것도 포장 단계 포장 로직 그 시경 시글 페브레스 단데 쇼게가 슈이 단데 다라이 베네다 지갑 런징기 거다 공부해 된데 요레스 지사브게 공부디 요레 나라이나 고사 조기 둥르디네 슈에 거고 브라소 단데 마옹발라 다 로체마 고사 조안 땅을 샵서 코토라 아니 그 시경라 레고 슈이 단다라 슈이 저랑 드링 모스 내가 제브레스 단데 거 간데 안가도 게 포장디 다 almost it's done 슈자 아니 디 간도 레버 챔비 슈이 안디 인지 민지 몸 지역의 잡슈시가 지금 그 시경라 레고 슈이 디 안에 나에게 레버 챔비 지 담을 슈이 디 슈이라 and during the Tamadilla, and then the Chiri Tango Chansha, Arunachal, the Northeast, Kasakalaji Kanam Pebres, and Sigur Namres, and that Maumali in the Peggy, Shevadam Wolum Shuguis, and Radu in the Sugar Tramsalte, Yansian Segure, and mix it and the Distabsum Narshi, the Combachito Nalere, Mombakasam Chik, and the Lobjan Nang Jimbres, the Rigne penetration, and the medical re, Tanashin Yani, that moment Tugalere, what that Tipale. 아니 멘즈칼레나레 럽둘리나레 건데카가레나 창마 건석하고 쳔다 그 투주구중이다 바동원서 갈가삼직 캡산 랭기오레 랭기 맞다 소소 지도나레 레시 아니 오늘 장내기 락렌다지 시작이 펜도고드스 슈에 최다 릭슌돌 시작이 펜도고요스 마오벌이나니 단다 우비미틱 주기 단다 겐디 고시경달레요레스 아니 건도 다 고들 감이 슈초부직 디슈에 엔 타마 탁졸다 데링데 믹세 전화한데 sab주 커버레스 엔 가능성은 직 마음을 드니시 제기 몰람 드레베스 디슈에인다. 저스텔레